following program is sponsored by Team Reba of Remax Metro East Side and Eric Aasness of Homebridge Financial Services. Welcome to Open House with Team Reba. Each week, Team Reba will be bringing you a roundup of real estate and mortgage news, along with information about the local Puget Sound region, highlighting some of the best and brightest entertainment options, family events, neighborhood highlights, and local business interviews, so you can feel right at home in the Pacific Northwest.
Welcome once again to Open House with Team Reba. I'm Reba Haas of Team Reba, Remax Metro East Side.
And I'm Eric Aasness here from Homebridge Financial Home Mortgage. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend. Right back at you once again.
Here we are again. Over 5 years of Open House with Team Reba.
Yes. So much wonderful material.
Oh, it's been fun.
Yeah. It's been totally
fun.
You know what? I'm really looking forward to today's show.
Yeah, which our show normally we're covering real estate and finance and a lot of things
related
in between.
Topics. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have some fun stuff every once in a while.
Absolutely.
Because not that, because you and I can talk real estate and mortgage all day long.
Till we're blue in the face.
Totally. That's exactly what I was going to say. So we've been around each other too much. Actually, did you notice that we both dressed in the same colors today? I just noticed that. Nice. Oh my God, we're becoming like those old couples that dress alike. Old married couple, and we're not even related.
Well, I'm not holding your hand when we cross the street. I'm telling you that right now.
No, we're not. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's too funny. No, I'm looking forward to the fact that I get to have a little minor reunion with a past client that I'm so excited to have on the show today. And then also just like a lot of the major topics we're going to be covering, because, one of the things that's been going on so much during COVID that has made me actually very happy in my heart about is the number of people who've started reading again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Because people have been at home or doing staycations and things like that. Because I don't know if you know this, but the statistics around the number of people who actually read post high school or college are pretty dismal.
Oh, they're really bad.
Yeah,
I'm lucky. I grew up in a household where everybody's a reader.
Same here.
And my kids are. And
absolutely,
it's something that.
Yeah, I mean, my niece Katie Jackson, she's an English teacher because of it. She loves literature, and I'm the same way.
A long term, it's good for you.
Oh, it's great for you. I read 40 to 60 books a year.
Alzheimer's and things like that, they say can be mitigated if you're keeping your mind active.
Yeah,
and reading
absolutely.
And challenging your brain.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's different ways to be able to read nowadays. Because the reason I get through 40 to 60 books each year is because I do still it's on paper, but I also listen to things like
audiobooks
all the time. And I love it. Love it.
Yeah, my youngest son's really into those. Maybe working around the house and you've got Harry Potter going or whatever.
Yeah.
In there. So,
I do a ton of education, both on like business material, anything to do with marketing. I've started actually getting a little bit more into fiction here and there. I love true historical novels. You and I have traded books even. In fact, I got your permission to hand off a book.
Oh, that's right.
Remember Astoria?
I want to talk about that one,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that book so much.
It's a good book.
It was a crazy good book. Shackleton, all these other things, Curve of Time, all these so many wonderful books. So, I'm looking forward to having our guest. We're going to have Chris Lundgren, who is an author living up in Alaska. And she's going to be calling in by phone today, so we'll get to her in our second, maybe third segments also.
Yeah.
But she's in town right now visiting. I'm also excited because I get to see her while she's here, and it's not just her, but her family, because listeners, this was the most fun thing. And I'm going to ask her what she thought the experience was like. So I might drop this bomb on her while we're all sitting in the segment. But her family was the first ones once COVID happened that went and did an all virtual purchase of a property through me and my team.
Total virtual.
Completely virtual.
Never saw the place.
They saw it, but not in the typical format.
Right.
We used video calls where I was actually touring the units for them and then pointing things out. And then I did everything in person on their behalf.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, it was so funny when they were closing it, the husband was, Carl was just like, this is the most expensive thing I've ever bought online.
Yeah, no kidding. Very expensive.
Which I thought was a riot.
Oh, too funny.
But then I found out that she's an author, and And as a bigger reader as I am, I was just like, well, I need to check this out.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
and it was fun. And I love I figured you would be into it just because, as you know, we both are big into the outdoors and have different experiences around that.
Yep.
And when we get her on in the next segment, we'll kind of compare and contrast, perhaps, some of those things.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of questions for her.
Excellent.
About how she got into it and how she's morphed in her writing career, because it's a thing. It's a lot easier to publish books nowadays, self-publish, but she's done it through an organization, and I'm so curious to learn more about it.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
when I understand you've got a book to give away.
I do. So many of our listeners, I hope, if they've been listening to us for a while, know that I'm a huge fan of Darren Hardy. And if you've never heard of Darren Hardy before, he wrote a book called The Compound Effect. And I have in my hot little hands right here a copy of that. I actually ordered several of them recently because I do a lot of programs that he has for like leadership training. And it is the 10th anniversary of the initial printing of The Compound Effect. And
Great book. Yeah,
it's a
great book.
Great book. And so I already have a copy. And in fact, actually, I went to one of his high performance forums, which now because of COVID, they're not going to continue doing anymore because it's a big 100-person event. But some of the material he covers can truly be life-changing. And a lot of people feel that way about this particular book. So listeners, here's the deal. I have some copies of this, and I would love to hear from you why you might want a copy of this. Like, if you're somebody out there who is excited about making a change in your life or doing some kind of personal growth, this book, whether you're starting a business, whether you're just trying to do self-improvement, or
do better at your current job.
Exactly. Because it's all these tiny little iterations that you can make in your life that end up over time having the compound effect. And I always love it.
They're easy.
They're easy. Yeah. Exactly. Many people get overwhelmed because they set these lofty goals, but they don't think about how they break that down into digestible pieces. And I also love because, what's one of the other things that's in finance? The compound effect.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Compound interest.
Sure.
So I figure
but yeah.
Well, it is a little bit different, but then again, it's not.
But it all adds up.
It all adds up. Those tiny little things do eventually add up. I mean, the compound interest thing is that, it's like, we've talked about this on the show where, you're using leverage on your down payment.
Right.
But this is still sort of kind of the same thing, but it's something that impacts your personal life. So I would be interested if you want to send a request to info@teamreba.com. I would love to read your stories, and I'm going to pick 2 or 3 of those, and I will send you're going to need to send me your name and address and that kind of stuff, and I'll send you a copy of this book.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you have not read the book, it can be a life changer. It's a great book.
Yes.
And if you even picked up 1 or 2 ideas, from that book, it's an easy read. It's a pretty fast read.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
if you pick up even one idea out of that book, you're going to be a better person for it.
And it's worth going back to read a couple of times over life.
Yeah, I have it on my nightstand. I need to do that myself. Just blow the dust off of it and go through it again. Because I was reading a few of the snippets, from that book, and probably one of the first things it says, the first step towards change is awareness. And the best way to become aware is to measure.
Yes.
Write things down. And but once you even start to realize and become aware of things, you've already changed.
Because you start paying attention.
You're already on the path. You're paying attention to it.
Yeah. I take goals, and I have in my room a couple of different mirrors. One of them's a full-length mirror, and I have opted to use one side of it to put my goals on.
Oh.
And I actually track, every year what some of my bigger goals are. And then, so there's my fitness goals. I have some of my business goals. I have a couple of motivating quotes that help propel me forward on each of those things on a regular basis. Because one of them is this transformation is not real without consistency.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
You know, you can't just go and lose the weight and then stop eating healthy and think you're going to stay at that weight.
Right.
Right? Or you can't.
Now, I tried that one.
Yeah, I noticed. Sorry. No, it's because Ellie cooks so much, and so do you. But you guys cook tasty food, I will say. So it's hard to turn down.
Healthy. Yeah.
But no, like all of those things are on there, and so in fact, maybe I don't always get to every single one of them, but I'm always propelling myself forward. And so, like some of the ones that I've already done this year, like we were talking on a recent show, I was talking about how I was refinancing my boat and my car. Those were two things that were on my list for this year to get around to getting done. And, you know, at the beginning of COVID, I was like, oh man, who knows what's going to happen with the economy? I don't know. But you know what? I just kept it every day in my sights. And a few weeks ago, I started the process, and here I am. Now I've got that piece done, and I'm saving money, and that money is now going to helping reduce debt for me. And I love that. Those things make me, I'm a Virgo, man. I'm like a uber Virgo. That makes me so happy to check it off my list.
Oh, it's nice to do
and
that.
to save money.
I do that
love
too.
It.
I do that too. Yeah. Look, here's I have my
I see.
my spiral binder.
Yes.
You know, and I'll take a number 2 Ticonderoga. And I just make the little boxes, and when I'm done, I check them off. And
doesn't it feel so good?
Especially the end of the day, you know,
yes.
you've got that,
like
that
done.
But then I also have one for bigger goals.
Yes,
and things
exactly.
that I'm not going to be able to just check it off in a couple hours. I've got to really dig in and do some
and that's
work.
what this book really does. Is it also helps you identify, like, okay, if my big goal is to get to here, how do I back into that? Right? Because you and I were always talking about that as goal setting. It's like, what is the ultimate goal? But how do I back into how to get there? What are the little daily steps that I need to get to every single day? Sometimes that little daily step is how much you're not buying at the Starbucks. So you put that money aside for a down payment somewhere.
Because $1 spent today is $5 in the future that you don't have.
Exactly. And
since
it's like $7 for a Starbucks nowadays, that's a whole lot.
That's $35.
Yes, it is. So anyway, we're going to get to our guest when we get back after this break. Really excited to bring on Chris Lundgren and her book, Accidental Adventures Alaska, here in just a few moments on Open House with Team Reba.
Open House with Team Reba on AM 1590. The Answer. Now, back to Open House with Team Reba.
Welcome back to Open House with Team Reba. I'm Eric Aasness from Homebridge Financial Home Mortgage.
And I'm Reba Haas from Team Reba.
And we're here every Saturday from 2 to 3 o'clock bringing information on real estate and finance.
And also on Sundays from 3 to 4 p.m. And
don't forget our podcasts.
Yes.
We've got 5 years of content on our podcasts. You can find us pretty much all the major podcast outlets.
Yes.
Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes. Just Buzzsprout, Ask Alexa.
Yeah. If you've got her. If you've got her. I actually had you know what I had someone tell me recently? They said they felt sad for me that I didn't have an Alexa.
Oh.
And I was like, don't feel sad for me. I don't want some lady sniffing around my house, listen to everything I have to say. Like, I don't feel bad at all.
Solid point.
I'm like, why do you feel sorry for me, weirdo? You know, I thought that was the dumbest thing to have someone feel sorry for you about. I was like, oh, poor me. I choose not to dive into your technology.
Well, speaking of dumb, if you want dumb, ask Alexa to tell you a joke. They are dumb. They're dad jokes, big time.
Yeah, well, and you are the king of dad jokes. But oh my gosh, I don't even know how to segue that into our guest right now.
Let's just go to Alaska, shall we?
I think we should. So we were just mentioning before the break that we have a guest with us today, and that is Chris Lundgren, who is an author. Welcome to Open House with Team Reba, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Reba. Thanks, Eric.
So we're super excited. So you're currently in town visiting from Alaska, are you not?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you didn't call in from Alaska, so we have you local, but we didn't quite get you into the studio. But let me ask, if I may, before you jump into the information about your book, where might you be staying, Chris?
Well, I happen to be in a condo that we bought through you at the Mark on Bellevue, and it's beautiful. We love it, and we were thankful that we had such an awesome realtor and that we could do it remotely.
Yes.
Because it was during the beginning of the height of the pandemic.
The very beginning of it, because I still remember that you guys were actually supposed to come down and tour properties with me. And because like all the BLM and everything else started to happen and the riots and you guys said, and COVID, you're like, everything combined, like we probably shouldn't come down.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
But so I have to ask though, what was it like having me tour the properties for you using virtual calls, like with video call?
Well, it was really, really helpful because you showed us everything. You weren't trying to, just gloss it over and make it look all pretty and everything. You showed us, there was one in particular that had some darker corners and and that sort of thing. And you knew that wouldn't work for us. And so, we got your full description of each place that you were looking at, plus, just being able to actually see it because we were video chatting.
Right. Yeah, that was the most fun. In fact, I think the one that you're talking about that did have a lot of darkness because we determined by its location and what was around it that it was surrounded by other buildings and would never actually have direct sunlight in it.
Oh, yeah,
which
that
would
sounds
be
awful.
And then on top of it, you could see into every building around you that was not that far away.
Yeah.
And so this was the beginning of COVID, so everybody's home.
Yeah, they're all looking out the window. Oh, who's in unit 308?
Exactly. So, and I actually took the phone and showed the whole Lundgren family. I'm like, see these people over here and this person over here. And I think this lady's still in her jammies.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah.
And that made it a very hard no.
Yeah.
Because I think my commentary was, unless you were either someone who was an exhibitionist or a voyeur.
Yeah, you're not for you.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that wasn't going to work.
Yeah, we've always commented we wish that some of these online listings had smell-o-vision, but you were there personally, so you could.
Yes, I could definitely tell them all of that. So, it was really great because what we also did during that transaction was, and I super appreciated this with your entire family, Chris, was that everyone was engaged in providing feedback and narrowing down, because when we started working together, they had a pretty broad sense of the number of neighborhoods they would consider. And by researching and talking together about what everyone was trying to do, because this is a condo that actually their son is living in, but the parents, so Chris and her husband Carl will be maybe eventually taking it over for them in retirement years, or for just short-term visits and things like that when they come down from Alaska. So we were trying to make everybody happy. Yeah,
it sounds like you were successful at that. That's good.
Yeah,
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited that you're here and that you're getting a chance to enjoy it. But let's talk about the fact that you are down from Alaska. So your book, Accidental Adventures Alaska. Do we always have to add the true tales of ordinary people facing danger in the wilderness? That's a large mouthful. I'll probably just call it AAA.
Oh, there you go. That's a good way to shorten it, definitely.
Yeah, but tell our listeners, like I've started reading the book and I'm into a couple of chapters, and it is tales of ordinary people getting into some like whoops moments.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you had mentioned the first chapter, and that's really one of my favorites because it was two hikers who got separated, and one of them got horribly lost. And I like it because it illustrates how easy it is to get lost and get yourself into trouble when you're in Alaska, because it doesn't take much to get off the beaten path.
So, yeah, in that particular chapter, it also mentions like, as the gal's being taken out by helicopter, she realizes like how close she is actually to civilization, but how wildly lost that she could be so close. Right?
Oh, and that can happen so easy.
And that happens here, too.
It does all the time.
Yeah,
it does all the time. Chris, I was mentioning just before the show, I read the first chapter, and I believe that was Ashley Werner. Was that the person who got lost? And it made me angry because growing up, I've mentored, started with Cub Scouts and then Boy Scouts. I have two boys that are Eagle Scouts. We've been on a lot of hikes. We've been in the woods all 4 seasons. And, what's the number one rule, when we're out in the woods is you got the buddy system. You stay with your buddy. You don't separate. And so anytime I read, things like that, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm yelling at the person, don't separate.
Right.
Yes, I believe it. Yeah, it is kind of the cardinal sin.
Right, but so out of curiosity though, Chris, so you wrote this book, and it's actually your third book, but what made you decide to go after these tales?
Well, several years ago, I wrote this article for my local newspaper on a local family who we knew who were on a voyage, like a 2.5-year ocean voyage on a sailboat, and their adventure was so cool and so much fun to write about. I just started thinking, I'd like to write something bigger on adventure. And then, of course, in Alaska, we hear about people's misadventures all the time. Fortunately, we've never had one that was bad enough to include in the book ourselves. But, I've just heard so many. So I kind of started with people I knew and started kind of throwing out a net and asking for stories. And then when I knew it was going to be a real book, I started researching newspapers around the state, and then actually contacted a few rescue agencies, too, to see if I could get a hold of people. Like, for instance, there's a chapter on an avalanche survivor, and that's one of the kinds of misadventures I wanted to include in the book. So that's kind of how it started and how I went about collecting these stories.
Okay. What is it about avalanches that was so compelling that you wanted to make sure that you would include it in this book?
Well, they're just so prevalent in Alaska, and we have so many agencies that are educating about avalanches, and yet we still have a lot of people who get caught up in them.
Well, see, you already just educated me right there, because I'm always thinking of like the wildlife,
right.
or just being out in exposure.
Yeah, no, a lot of avalanches are triggered by snowmobiles.
Oh, yeah.
Or,
or even just mishaps on hiking.
Misreading the conditions or being in the wrong place at the wrong time, of course, as well.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, for me, Chris, why I find this kind of interesting and a great reminder, one, like the second chapter I'm in right now has about a boating accident, which, of course, I'm a boater, and so is Eric. So I'm very interested about seeing how that one ends up. And then that first story, actually, something very similar to that happened to me as a teenager. Because I grew up in Kansas, which, of course, no mountains.
Where you get lost in the corn?
I didn't get lost in Kansas. I said I grew up there, Eric. God. But that's the whole thing, is like I went to this church that, for us, we went to lots of events in Colorado because it was the next big closest place, right, for adventure. And so we were at cabins up in the mountains in Estes Park, I think it was. And I went on a hike with several of my other, youth group members, and I was in way better shape than all of them. And unfortunately, this was before I learned a lot of things after I moved out here and became a member of the Mountaineers. You don't let your fastest person lead. Right. I found out many years later, but I was leading. And of course, you can't hear a lot of stuff in the forest floor because it's fairly quiet. And by the time I realized nobody was behind me any longer, I was above tree line. Oh. And got caught in a typical Colorado storm with some pretty major hail, with cotton clothes on, shorts and a sleeveless shirt, and ended up experiencing hypothermia, got headaches because I was being pelted with such heavy hail, and was terrified up there. Yeah, couldn't really move for a while because there was so much hail that came down that it made all of the rocks slick. So it took 2 hours before I could even get off the rocks.
Trail can become a river in a matter of minutes. When you get into that kind of situation.
Yeah. So just getting through your first chapter of this book, I was kind of having flashbacks, but also feeling like Eric of like, no, lady, no, what are you doing? So it was a little bit of that.
Sorry that triggered you.
Yeah. Well, but in a good way. I mean, I was definitely still interested in what she was doing and why she was doing it, because as you're describing her situation, you really feel like you're in her first person element of that, of her describing what's going on, and she's actually explaining what's happening in her head. But before I get you to answer some more questions on that, though, we're about to go back into a break. But when we do, I'd love to know what your process was when you were getting these stories and how you were able to transfer them into such a great way within the book. So they sounded like first person, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, great. We'll be right back after these messages on Open House with Team Reba. Thanks for listening. Again with Chris Lundgren, author of Accidental Adventures, Alaska.
Open House with Team Reba on AM 1590. The Answer. Now, back to Open House with Team Reba.
Welcome back to Open House with Team Reba. I'm Reba Haas of Team Reba, RE/MAX Metro East Side.
Welcome back indeed. This is Eric Aasness from Homebridge Financial Home Mortgage, and we've got Chris Lundgren with us, author of
Accidental Adventures, Alaska. So I've only made it through the first chapter so far, Chris, but really, really an enjoyable read. And anybody that's had any experience in the outdoors, it's like, ooh, yeah, that's kind of triggering me here a little bit. So can you give us I know Reba has some questions for you, but can you give us kind of a bigger overview of the book? Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, there are 20 chapters, and all of them, except for one, are from the survivor's point of view. And that's a little bit of a spoiler, too, which tells you that every person made it back. So anyway, so all of them are from the survivor's point of view. The one that is not was actually a mud flask rescue that happened in the Cook Inlet. And I told it from a volunteer firefighter's point of view, one of the people who rescued this fisherman who had been stuck, or fisherwoman who had been stuck in the mud and as the tide was coming up. So it's 20 tales. I interviewed people, and then I wrote up a draft and re-interviewed people, and then when I had it as polished as I thought I could get it, I made sure each person that I interviewed got to take a look at it, so it was accurate from their perspective.
Excellent. And this is available on Amazon, it looks like?
Yes,
I see it on there as a Kindle and a paperback.
Correct.
And if this were me writing a book report, of course, I'd be saying, it's 240 pages and it weighs 16.8 ounces.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Very good.
So I'm going to go back to so you did the interviews. Were you just taking notes? Were you recording people? How were you capturing their stories?
Well, I record. I always ask the people on tape, is it okay if I record the interview? Because I find that by having the entire interview and being able to transcribe it and go back over and over, there's so much that I would have missed if I was just taking notes. And that's me personally. A lot of people do it differently, but I prefer that. And it's a longer process because I still transcribe it, typing it into the computer. So it takes a while, but I find that's a really good way to get really far into the storyline and to kind of pick out the points that I'm going to make a narrative out of.
So with all these, these different chapters, different things happening to different people, is there a common denominator? Like things, something that, that like, a word to the
Being
wise,
unaware.
Right. I mean, or is some of this just bad luck?
Some of it was bad luck, some of it bad choices, and sometimes both. I think in a lot of cases it was both. So there are really two common denominators, I would say, and it's all how the people view it when they look back. Some people are still very sobered by what happened to them, and they look back and you can tell they still really feel the trauma. Mm-hmm. And then other people have had enough distance and have been able to process it enough. And quite a few people were very funny about how they described what happened to them. So I found people fell into one of the two camps.
Well, I think that's probably, one of the, the person's general nature will kind of have a little bit of an impact on the outcome. The one thing I always taught the scouts growing up is what's the worst thing that you can do in an emergency situation, and that's to panic. Because a lot of bad decisions get made if you panic.
Yeah.
And
stopping, taking a breath.
Yeah.
All of that.
But
yes.
that's easier said than done. Depending on what the circumstances are.
Absolutely true. So Eric asked the question of is it bad luck? Is it this and that? Because like going into the second chapter, which is about the boating incident, that was interesting from the standpoint of it wasn't something that they did wrong. It was an engine that cut out.
Mm-hmm.
But they happened to be going right into a channel that just had like a wall of a rock.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I just was reading that last night. I was like, I don't know if I should be reading this before I go to sleep. Because I did wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't go to sleep for an hour and a half. But I don't think so much from that. It was just, but it was, someone, and I'll say this, Chris, it's because on Labor Day weekend, I was coming back on my boat. I'm a still new boater. And this guy's talking about being in 14-foot swells. Mm-hmm. And I was in 6-foot swells out on Puget Sound. Mm-hmm. And so having just had that recent experience and then trying to extrapolate what that would be like, because he was only in like a 34-foot boat and mine's 30.
That's not a lot of difference there.
No. And I thought,
right.
Oh my gosh, what would I have done? I mean, Chris, I'm kind of glad you have that chapter in there because it made me go, I probably need to go back through all the safety instructions on my boat and make sure I know where absolutely, because he's talking about where like the suits are, the rubber suits they have to get into. And I'm just like, this is reminding me that I need to not get complacent because like Eric and I have talked about, like right now, boat sales have skyrocketed because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
And there's a bunch of yahoos out there who don't know what they're doing.
Yes, there are.
And so for me, I'm like, this is kind of a good learn some things from other people's mistakes so that you don't have to, type of thing. So I'm appreciative of that. So I know the book just came out this summer. Is it doing as well as you thought that it might? I mean, like, because you're a newer author. Like, this is only your third book.
Right. It's hard to tell how it's doing because I will get at some point I'll get a statement from the publisher, but that's a ways down. I do know that in Alaska, my local distributor has sold out a couple times, and there seems to be a pretty high demand for it.
Nice.
But again, I'm kind of in the dark now until I find out a little bit more from the publisher.
Right. So yours is different from the standpoint of you have gone through a publisher because a lot of people are doing self-publishing today, right? So you're going the more traditional route. What are the other books that you have that are out there right now?
Well, the first one I wrote was called The Runner's World Guide to Running in Pregnancy. And I wrote that really when I couldn't find a book that I was trying to read on running in pregnancy because during my first pregnancy, I was given some very, very conservative advice about, if your heart rate gets above a certain level, you just need to stop and walk. And that really wasn't very acceptable to me. But, of course, I did it to be careful.
I'm going to guess that was a male doctor?
Actually, no, it wasn't.
Really? That's surprising.
Right.
Now.
But so I did some research between pregnancies, and then before my second one, I knew I had found through the internet a doctor who had done studies on women exercising hard in their pregnancies and said, yes, it's perfectly safe. So I started to write a book proposal and then sent it out to Rodale Press, which used to be the publisher of Runner's World. I don't know if they still are, but and they scooped it up, and so the book came out actually a long time ago, 2003, and that is still in print because I think there's still a need for information on running during pregnancy.
100%. Actually, I was a state-level swimmer in high school, and I remember our coach was pregnant during one of the seasons that we had, and I remember she had been told to possibly not swim during that time herself, and she went, "What? That seems ridiculous." Right. And so she did something kind of similar and started putting out like these tutorials around swimming during pregnancy, and it seems like it's perfectly good.
Nothing wrong with that. Running, swimming.
Yeah.
Maybe not boxing.
Probably not.
But
yeah. But from the health aspect, I mean that's the thing that you see is women tend to recuperate from their pregnancies better when they're in good health.
Yes, definitely, and it's there's some evidence to show that babies can benefit from it too, so which is really kind of cool.
Yeah. I can imagine so from a bunch of different levels, but that's not what this show is about. So I want to make sure I don't digress. I have a squirrel. So what was the second book?
The second book was kind of a niche publication. It was a history of the area where I live, and that was put out by Arcadia Press. And they do all kinds of niche publications across the country. But they wanted to get into the area where I live, and I was a member of the Historical Society there. And
do you want to say where it is that you lived, or is that like private information?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's in Eagle River, Alaska. It's 12 miles northeast of Anchorage. And so the publisher kind of wanted to, I think they had, at that point, they only had 2 other books in the whole state, and they were trying to expand. And so they wanted to look into our area. And so I put out, it's called Legendary Locals of Chugach Eagle River.
Well, I am definitely going to check that
off
out.
the tongue. Yeah.
Well, after I'm done with this one, I'm definitely going to check that one out as well, because you mentioned in the kind of the foreword of this that you've always had kind of a fascination with Alaska, and then you said you found your husband Carl, who's similar. So what drives that fascination?
Well, I grew up in a suburban area, but my mom was really good about getting us outside and doing kind of, for the area, kind of unusual things. And so I've always enjoyed the outdoors. And then just as I got older, I just craved more and more adventure. And we had this opportunity to move to Alaska 23 years ago, and thinking we were just going to be up there for a couple of years. And we were lucky, and we've been able to stay.
What's your favorite thing about where you live?
The mountains, I would have to say. I think that's the main thing. And I know you guys get some of that in Washington too with moose. We do see a lot of moose.
Yeah, not too many.
We don't
but
see so
every now
many
and then.
moose. We see a lot of elk.
We get a few.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, neat. So yeah, those are the major things that I love about Alaska.
I've had employees that lived up there and worked out of Anchorage, and I always had a hard time keeping track of them because they were always out of the office, and it was either moose season, elk season, bear season, sockeye season. You know, it was sort of one or the other.
That sounds like you fish and crab.
That's right. But thinking of seasons here, we do have a break coming up. Chris, could you stay on for a few more minutes?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, hang on. We're just going to take a real quick break here, pay a couple bills, and we're going to be right back with Open House with Team Reba. Be right back.
Open House with Team Reba on AM 1590. The Answer. Now, back to Open House with Team Reba.
Welcome back, Open House with Team Reba. I'm Eric Aasness, and I'm from Homebridge Financial Home Mortgage, but you knew that already.
Well, I did. I don't know if everybody else who's listening to the radio knew that, but I'm Reba Haas from Team Reba.
And we have Chris Lundgren on the air with us, who author of Accidental Adventures at Alaska. And really happy to have you. Accidental Adventures Alaska, available on Amazon.
Yes.
You know, Chris, I got really kind of into, books and things on Alaska when my kids were little. And we had the pleasure of having Gary Paulson make a stop by the school. And Gary wrote some children's books. Probably most famous one is called Hatchet. But kind of talking about a move from the Midwest to Alaska and entered the Iditarod.
Oh, wow.
And, knowing absolutely nothing about dogs or anything like that. But, man, the shows and books and lore about Alaska have really taken off. I mean, on cable now there's a lot of kind of reality type shows that are kind of focused on it. And so nice to see that you're deep into that as well. So you have, and I know you have this book out, Accidental Adventures Alaska. Anything else on the horizon?
Yes, I am just delving into Accidental Adventures Alaska Volume 2. So just getting going on that right now.
Is it just because there's so many people in Alaska screwing up that there's that many stories available?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm obviously joking. I mean, because
it's like, hey, hold my beer.
Oh, well, no, because you actually said, you said earlier in the show that your stories come, or the sources for the stories come from a number of different resources. Are you going back to some of the same places, or how are you doing your research for this one?
Well, as I was writing the first one, and as it was coming out, I have had a lot of people say, "Oh, I've got a story for you." So my first line of attack is to check into all those stories and see if they will fit. I'm probably not going to go back to the same rescue agencies, but Eric, you mentioned Gary Paulson and the Iditarod. I was thinking probably having an Iditarod story would be a good idea, or at least a dog mushing story of some kind.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I'm starting, and I'll have to kind of determine what still needs to go into the book and what kind of agencies or areas where I'll kind of check out the newspapers and see what kinds of stories have appeared.
You know, I love that, because one of my pet peeves is I'll read a story in the paper, and you never have the conclusion. It says so and so was involved, trapped in their car for 8 days, and had to eat their foot or whatever they had to do, and then but then you never know what happened. There's no follow up, there's no follow through, and it'd be wonderful to have a book where you could say, hey, I remember actually reading about that or hearing about that. And to know, here's what really happened in that situation. So that would be awesome. Well, you absolutely have a lot of material to work with, I'm sure, being up there.
Yes. And I have to say, Eric, it's really satisfying when I do research something and I can get a hold of the person whose story was in the paper and really find out that ending and flesh out the whole story. It's incredibly satisfying.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's good, and especially anybody that's working in the outdoors. I'm going to make a little pitch here. This is something, of course, we always taught in scouting, and it's have your 10 essentials.
Yes, the Mountaineers does that
essentials. Too. You want a map, a compass, sunglasses or sunscreen, clothing, flashlight, first aid, fire starter material, matches, knife, food, blanket. I have used trekking poles when I'm in the mountains, and I wrap half a roll of duct tape on there. So I got duct tape.
Say toilet paper.
So no, that's on the other pole. No, you see me hiking with a roll of TP.
Pack it out, Betty.
That's right. But little things like that, shot cord, a mirror for signaling. I mean, there's some simple things. All of that can fit in a 1-gallon Ziploc bag. And just bring it with you.
Yes.
It's easy enough, and that can get you out of a lot of pickles, when you're out there in the woods.
Well, and that's sort of actually, Chris, one of the reasons I thought it would be fun to have you on is all the issues that are happening in this book often happen here.
Right.
Avalanches happen here. Small craft advisories happen here. I mean, there was a small craft advisory when I was out in the 6-foot swells, and we opted to go out there, and we got, knock on wood, we got lucky that we didn't have any mishaps.
Absolutely.
There were a lot of boats out there, and a lot of tiny boats out there that day.
The day you were talking about, there were small craft advisories out there, and there were a lot of boats that had trouble that day.
Yeah.
But also what I've noticed with COVID, if you go, and at least I don't know if it's the same in Alaska, Chris, but in Washington, every hiking trailhead, popular trail on the weekends is packed. In fact, some of them you're turned away. They're so crowded because everybody's stir crazy and they want to get outside.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of folks out in the mountains, out hiking, doing this, doing that have absolutely no idea what they're doing.
You can tell just by looking at the gear they're wearing.
And you're reading about that. We're reading about rescues. We're reading about people slipping off of cliffs and
or watching their cell phones and falling off of cliffs.
Or worse. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So so I have a feeling you'll have plenty of material to be writing about for many years to come.
Yes, I have the feeling you're right.
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you ever run out of stories, which I doubt will happen in Alaska, you could always just come down here because there's, tenfold because of the number of people down here.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, accidental adventures can happen anywhere. That's for sure.
That's right. Have to do I see the makings of a franchise here.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Chris, I am a fan of how you wrote it because, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that you do come across with kind of that first person narrative. But I do feel like you have the heart in here of, here's what I learned, because it talks about oh my gosh, here's this moment and this anxiety I was experiencing, and here's what I still chose to do, and how I tried to work through it, or here at the end of the story, here's what I realized out of all this. Because like even that first chapter, she ends with, and many years later, she still remembers the main lessons of what happened on that first excursion gone awry, right?
Right.
And and you as a reader are following along, and you're experiencing, the pains that she's having, and seeing the mistakes, or recognizing later on the mistakes, because like she mentions, dipping her water bottle into the river numerous times. And so I wasn't surprised at the end of her story about how she had, was it pronounced Giardia?
Beaver fever.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what we call it.
Beaver fever.
Giardia. Yeah.
Okay. And she lost 15 pounds in like 2 weeks.
Oh yeah,
because
that'll make you
makes you
sick.
so sick.
Oh yeah, big time.
And here she was trying to, pass some other tests, for some other things that she was doing, and dealing with that leftover of some poor decision making. But it's now seared into her brain of like, I need to make better decisions. And honestly, like for us here on this show, we're constantly bringing up the mistakes we see people make within real estate transactions, because what we're trying to help our listeners do is to recognize things before they get themselves into that situation.
That's right.
Learn from someone else's mistake so that you yourself don't have to go through it and have the pain and suffering that can come along with it. So I really love. Anything else? We're getting down towards the end of the show. Anything else you would like to convey to our listeners, either about the book or obviously it's available on Amazon. We've got the holidays coming up, so certainly available as great gift items.
Yeah, well, all I would like to say is that, we're in a very tense time right now, and I like to think that these stories, they create a lot of tension, and then that tension is resolved. So maybe that's the book's contribution during this pandemic time that we're in.
Excellent. Yeah.
Well said. Couldn't have written it better.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. Real pleasure to meet you, and look forward to reading the rest of your book.
And when I see you, I want you to sign my copy.
Oh, I'll be happy to. All right. Thank you both.
All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of Open House with Team Reba. Thanks again for listening. Join us every Saturday from 2 to 3 and Sundays these days from 3 to 4 as well. And on podcasts.
Look for us on podcasts.
That's right.
Correct.
Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Open House with Team Reba. To contact us, visit Team Reba at RE/MAX Metro Eastside on Facebook, or email info@teamreba.com. Join us again next Saturday afternoon at 2 for more Open House with Team Reba here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Team Reba of RE/MAX Metro East Side and Eric Aasness of Homebridge Financial Services.